Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Beitler, the director here at the Marion E. Wade Center, and tonight I am just so very excited to welcome a speaker who is definitely no stranger to this place, Crystal L. Downing. It's so great to have you back. Dr. Downing, as many of you know, was the director here. She's also the author of 6 books. Including Salvation from Cinema, The Medium is the Message, and this book, Subversive, Christ, Culture, and the Shocking Dorothy L. Sayers, which, by the way, received a Publishers Weekly starred review, as did her book, Changing Signs of Truth. So she's done a lot. And she was also a former distinguished professor of English and Film Studies at Messiah College in Pennsylvania before accepting this position here as co-director of the Marion E. Wade Center and co-holder of the Marion E. Wade Chair in Christian Thought at Wheaton, a position she held with her husband, C.S. Lewis scholar. There he is. The famous and infamous David C. Downing. Let me just pause here because academic bios don't capture so much of our lives, and just a not insignificant part of what Crystal and David did in their last year as co-directors of the Wade was help me get up to speed for stepping into this role. So thank you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Crystal's latest book, and that's the reason we're here, is titled The Wages of Cinema. Here it is, The Wages of Cinema, A Christian Aesthetic of Film in Conversation with Dorothy L. Sayers. This is a great book. I've read it cover to cover, and we're going to have a book signing in the museum shortly after this, and you're going to want to get a copy of this book. So with that, please join me in welcoming Crystal L. Downing back to the Bakke Auditorium for her talk on the wages of cinema.
It is so wonderful to see familiar faces in this crowd. I wish I could just say something special about everyone. And I started my research here on this book, so it's appropriate. This is really the first event that I have done about this book. And I want to talk about just what is distinctive that I wanted to do. I am the type of person that I feel like I shouldn't be publishing a book unless I'm doing something nobody has ever done before. And because of that, I always get pushback from publishers. As one, after my first Sayers book, I had an agent for the first book, and then he stopped being my agent, and he said, well, the trouble is most publishers want the same old with a twist. And he goes, Crystal, you don't do same old. And I go, you bet your buttons I don't do same old. So nobody in the world has ever thought to put together Sayers and cinema. And in the course of our talk, I will explain why. I already gave a talk as the co-director and co-holder of the Wade Chair of Christian Thought called The Wages of Cinema, the spiritual montage of Dorothy L. Sayers. And so that was, as you can see, in March 2019. But then something unusual happened insofar as I had been invited to write an essay for Christianity Today on Dorothy Sayers while I still lived in Pennsylvania. And the manuscript for this essay was due the day we closed on our house in Pennsylvania before moving here. So I just had to write everything I knew from the top of my head. And of course, fortunately, Christianity Today, they don't want real scholarly articles. So I just put it out there. And afterwards, I was getting letters from all over the country saying, I've never heard of this lady, Dorothy L. Sayers, before. And one woman said, you know what? This is a fascinating woman. I would like you to write a book for us. I work for Fortress Press. And I just got a book contract out of the blue. It's every author's dream, right? So that was this book, Subversive. So I had to put my research on Sayers and cinema on hold. I was, as Jim commented, I taught film at another Christian college out in Pennsylvania. So part of what I talked about was an essay by Sayers called Towards a Christian Aesthetic. And what I really wanted to do was focus on a Christian aesthetic of film. But as I was here doing research, I discovered all these unpublished letters where Sayers was writing about film. And it made me want to do something that no Christian had ever done before, and that's very like Sayers too, she inspired me. Most books by Christians on film, they reduce film, as I say here, to content delivery systems. And as I quote, one author says, in film, story reigns supreme. And so they would just talk about a film and what you could learn from it, but they were totally ignoring the artistry of film. And the irony is this theologian who wrote in film, story reigns supreme, he's wrong. Almost every important filmmaker, every important film theorist says film isn't about story. And it is about the medium itself. And the importance is on, as I say on this slide, seeing. And as I thought about this, as I was myself teaching film at a Christian college in Pennsylvania, film is a particular medium, just as Jesus is a medium of salvation. And one of the heresies in the early church is called Docetism, where people didn't want to believe that God would actually take on flesh. I mean, we're so used to it. Yeah, Jesus, fully God, fully human. But this is an outrageous idea. And Docetists, they believed in Jesus, they believed in salvation from Christ, but they didn't think he was fully human. And it was just Jesus was God's content delivery system. And all too many Christians turn film into a content delivery system. They ignore the artistry of film itself. Seeing is very important. In Scripture, I love Hagar's statement to the angel, "Thou art a God of seeing." And when you look at the beginning of Scripture, we are told over and over and over again that in the beginning God created, and God saw that it was good. And the word in the Hebrew is just the basic word for seeing. And it's repeated over and over and over again. And God saw that it was good. And so I kind of found it ironic that Christians were writing about film, but they weren't talking about what they were seeing. They were just talking about the story. They might have well just have been reading the screenplay. So I want to do a little test then about seeing. The opening screen had a picture of my book on the screen, and Jim held up the book. What do you remember was on the cover of the book? What did you see? Anyone want to say something? Hey, hi.
There was a screen from a black and white movie of a man screaming, I think.
Oh, on this screen, yeah, but there was a cover of the book next to it. So that was, yeah, a Charlie Chaplin film.
Number 3.
Okay, yes. It looks like the number 3, yes, which is good.
It's the 3 from reel when you're counting down towards the.
Okay, yeah, in old movies, when they would go 3, 2, 1. Okay. Anybody else have something that they remember seeing? Green, good job. Okay. Part of what, when I first saw the cover of this book, I didn't like it at all because I thought, well, why is there a big number 3 on the cover of the book? That's mainly what I saw. And then the more time I spent with it, I realized that, for one thing, yeah, this is supposed to be a projector rather than the number 3. But I think it's more the countdown, 3, 2, 1, has been mentioned. But what I saw too were Mickey Mouse ears. Do you see it? And the thing is, the more time, I was annoyed by it at first, but now I realize how appropriate it is because it encompasses much of what I am doing in the book, and I don't think they intended this. First of all, I saw the number 3, and as some of you did, a movie projector, which is what they intended. I saw Mickey Mouse ears. And what's interesting is that in Sayers' last published novel, Busman's Honeymoon, she and Peter go to see a Mickey Mouse film. So, kind of worked out. But yes.
I noticed it was by Crystal L.
Thank you, thank you. He's a plant in the audience. Okay, so the last novel that Dorothy Sayers published is called Busman's Honeymoon. And it was published in America, Haunted Honeymoon, and this is some famous actors. So these 2 actors actually, they make many references to film. They go see a Mickey Mouse film. Uh-oh, I lost it on my, so, well, okay. So, and frankly, it's a really bad film. So don't go out of your way to see it. But this was, this is interesting because biographers say of Sayers, after she had an experience in 1935, that she never had anything to do with film again. Well, what about this one? And also, In the collected letters of Dorothy L. Sayers, the editor, who is a friend of Sayers, left out every single letter that referred to film. Oh, that positively referred to film. She left in letters where Sayers went to a film and just was disgusted with it. But the editor was born in 1914. She was in an era where film was not taken seriously. She wanted to prove that Dorothy Sayers was this brilliant scholar. So she didn't want people to know that she went to movies because that might detract. And she didn't realize that by the 1970s in America, there were film schools being planted around America. So I like this picture of the biography of Dorothy Sayers because it looks like she's watching a film in this one over here. So because I had access to unpublished documents while working here at the Wade, I could look beyond the film that Sayers was asked to write a story to be made in a film. And it was such an awful, awful film that she repudiated it. She just was horrified by it. She wanted it to be recut. And basically, she was committed to the artistry of film because she had gone to some great films in her life. So what is interesting about this, and what a lot of people don't know, if they've never studied the history of film, the 30s were the nadir of film production. Because sound came in 1927, and everybody was just so excited about sound, they weren't thinking of the visual artistry of film at all. Here's a good example, and this is the person, the director, who directed the film made out of Dorothy Sayers, the screen scenario that she set up. So Reginald Denham, between 1933 and 1939, I directed 24 pictures, and weren't they awful? What I discovered that no other Sayers scholar knew about was an act that was passed in 1927 where so many Britain was worried about all these American films coming and filling the theaters in Britain that they said you can only have one American film for 4 British films. And so it was to encourage the British film industry. But what happened is people just started churning out really crummy films. And so the film that Sayers wrote the scenario for, it was one of these, and the term for them now are quota quickies. That Britain has to fill a certain quota of movies in order to get a really good American film. And it was just to promote the industry. So here the director himself says that they were awful. And he was the director of this film, and people just assumed that Sayers didn't like film. What she didn't like was bad work. And as many of you know, she was committed to the integrity of work. When she was at Oxford University, she saw films. She wrote home to her parents about films. Those, you go through the letters, the published letters, the editor just takes out the paragraph where Sayers talks about how glorious a certain film is. But we know that Sayers was watching some of the most highly regarded films in the silent era. And many people consider that the silent era was the apex of filmmaking. Especially they thought that soon after sound came, because the quality of films went down. All it was, people were concerned about was the sound. So she saw Quo Vadis, she saw The Three Musketeers. I published an essay based on my research in the journal that the Wade puts out, making a case that I think Sayers saw the Inferno, which was a very powerful film and got rave reviews. And she was probably thinking of that when later in her life she agreed to translate Dante's Inferno into English. So, as you know, with Dante's Inferno, Virgil is leading him through, and what is fascinating, and the Sayers family owned a copy of the Doré illustrations of the Inferno. Even though Virgil is leading Dante through the Inferno and Purgatorio and then up to heaven, the Virgil died before Christ was born. So it was very odd to have someone who wasn't alive when Christ was alive to be the person leading the character of Dante through the various levels of hell and purgatory, and then finally to the celestial, or someone else had to take over to get to the celestial city. Okay, so in my book then, I suggest that Sayers can be our Virgil, leading us through the glorious and infernal history of film. And I justify that by showing all these unpublished references she has in her letters. And the wonderful thing about the Wade is that this is the preeminent archive in the world for Dorothy Sayers materials. So there is more here than anywhere else that you could find. So what prepared her to be a good Virgil? Virgil died before Christ and yet was leading Dante to see Christ. Whereas Sayers, she was alive during the development of film, and she won a photography prize when she was at what we would call a private high school, and that would be the type of camera she was using there on the left. And then later, after she went to Oxford and had teaching experience, she wrote home and told her parents, "I've taken to photography again. It needs no words." And this is a really important phrase, because part of the reason many film theorists say the height, the glory of cinema was in the silent era. Because in the silent era, you were forced to look at the image and try to understand the image, whereas we just get so used to dialogue and sound that we aren't paying as much attention to the image. Sayers also had herself photographed by a woman who became one of the most important photographers in England. And Sayers hardly had any money at this time, but she said, I need a photograph as I'm going out applying for jobs, and Oxford is horrible for photography. And she did research and found a photographer who she identified as an artist. So the visual image was extremely important to her, and this was taken by Dorothy Wilding, who is the exact same age as Sayers. They were both born in 1893. This is Wilding, and Wilding is famous for her photographs of Queen Elizabeth, and you've probably seen these photographs. This Sayers recognized before anybody else that this Dorothy Wilding had an artistic eye for the photographed image. She also took photos, Dorothy Wilding did, of Noel Coward. And this was from 1930. Part of what I did in my book project is I just went, and every time there was some type of connection, I went and read the biography. So I read Noel Coward's biography, and I found him quoting Sayers several times, and he, that's a little too soon. He actually would help people to act in a film by saying, act like Dorothy Sayers. Now, Coward is also famous because he took as his collaborator David Lean, and Lean is one of the greatest film directors of all time. These are some of his famous films. But what is interesting is that the person who mentored David Lean, who then helped Noel Coward with his work, is called Michael Powell. And Michael Powell not only mentored David Lean, but he influenced Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, George Romero. And so, of course, then I had to read the entire autobiography of Michael Powell to understand him, because, and it was wonderful to read because he is very like Sayers in that he's committed to the integrity of work. And here are some of the films he's made. I don't know if you've seen them. That's Deborah Kerr in Black Narcissus. But here at the Wade, we have a letter from the famous Michael Powell, who's in every history of film book around, a letter to Dorothy Sayers. And he wants to meet with her to talk about making her novels, a couple of her novels, into film. I mean, this is really big stuff. So then, of course, I had to read a biography of Powell's, and I quote him throughout my book because he is so similar to Sayers. They are both committed to the integrity of work. Now, I bring up Bridge on the River Kwai at this moment, and I'll explain why in a bit. This was 1957, and I would not be surprised if Sayers saw this, because Sayers had a movie theater that was next door to her house where she lived outside of London. And I talk about this in my book, I have a whole chapter on war films. And how do you distinguish between a quality-made war film versus just, the shoot 'em up, just try to stimulate you arbitrarily. So it's based on the 1942 incident where British prisoners of war were forced to build a bridge in Thailand after the fall of Singapore to the Japanese. And if you haven't seen it, it is a really fantastic film. Coincidentally, Dorothy Sayers was accused of causing the fall of Singapore to the Japanese. So there is a connection there, incidental, but it is because of her BBC radio plays that when she had a radio interview about them, she read snippets, and people were appalled that she did not use King James English in her plays. And this is the Wade annotated edition. It is fantastic. I encourage you all to buy it because it just explains everything that was going on at the time, and I'm sure they have plenty out in the bookstore. Christians, other than C.S. Lewis, Christians were outraged by Sayers' plays about Jesus. And that's what the Man Born to be King is. They're radio plays about Jesus. Not only because she didn't use King James English, but she had slang. And the controversy, she got hate mail, she got threatening phone calls, but she resisted it and said, no, I am staying with this project. And it's good she did, because despite the fact that Christians were demanding these plays be taken off the air, thousands of people came to Christ because of these radio plays, because they were so inured to King James English, and they finally understood what the Bible stories were about. And of course, Sayers included the death and resurrection of Jesus. It was transformative, and Christians tried to suppress it. C.S. Lewis so loved The Man Born to be King that he read it every year for his Lenten devotions for 20 years until he died. That is how powerful it is. So, part of what I wanted to do in my book then is to talk about the power of theater and show how theater itself, which Sayers is famous for, how cinema developed out of theater and how theater is inherently religious. The Greek thea means a sight. Thalma means a thing compelling the gaze. So theater is about the power of the visual. It is about seeing. And this is the cover of my first book. And I love it because that's Dorothy Sayers performing in front of her fellow Oxford University students and leading them in a chorus. And she was very aware of the power of seeing. And this came to a head when she was asked a year after this really crummy, she was asked to write a film, and it was a really bad film, but all the films in the 30s were really bad. And people don't realize that. They say Sayers gave up on cinema. No, she gave up on bad quality. And, the fact that she met with Michael Powell proves that she was interested in continuing her interest in film. So Zeal of Thy House was just a couple years after the bad film that was made out of her writings. And this, it made her think through a theology of aesthetics. And so key to my book then is, what is the theology of art? How can Sayers help us understand that? And Zeal of Thy House helps. And it was like, I see it as the phoenix. That's an image of the phoenix rising again, because that bad film that she was involved with was made by Phoenix Films. 1935, The Silent Passenger. It was just awful. That's supposed to be Lord Peter Wimsey holding a gun. You never have him holding a gun in any of Sayers' 12 books, and he isn't in all 12. It's just a really bad film. But in the 30s, they were bad films because people were so enamored of sound. That's all they really worried about. And because Sayers denounced this poor film, they assumed she was denouncing cinema entirely. No, she's denouncing crummy work. And it's because of her experience with Phoenix Films that she became committed to the integrity of work. And she aligns it with the Imago Dei. So God created man, and I use King James because that's what most people were reading back in her day. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And as those of you familiar with Sayers all know, that she took this verse to suggest that the Imago Dei, so the image of God, Imago Dei, is fulfilled by creativity. Because what is the God of Genesis? The God of Genesis 1 especially is not a judge, is not a redeemer. The God of Genesis 1 is a creator, and we are created in God's image. So creativity, she argued, is what fulfills the Imago Dei. Nobody had argued this before. Soon after she saw the initial performance of Zeal of Thy House, where she actually theorized issues of creativity, she wrote an essay for Sight and Sound, which is still the preeminent film journal in England. And she called it Detective Stories for the Screen, Some Advice to Producers. And basically, she is countering the lack of integrity of work that she saw in filmmaking, as well as in other areas in the 1930s. So she wasn't alone. One of the things that I discovered in my research is after she had finished Zeal of Thy House, where she actually explores what does it mean to practice the integrity of work. How is that significant to Christianity? She went to Venice, and I make a case, and I'm pretty sure she went to the Venice Film Festival. Part of the reason I assume that is she went 2 summers in a row, and the first summer she was complaining how crowded it was during summer, but then why did she go back the exact same time the next summer? Well, both times she went was during the Venice Film Festival. Now, I can't prove it, I haven't found it in the letters, but given her interest in the film festival, I think that's what was happening. So she made this pretty dramatic statement. all drama is religious in origin. And whew, this is pretty spicy stuff. The Pharisees, oops, sorry, misspelling. The Pharisees, after all, read their Bibles from cover to cover and were none the better for it. They might have done better to wrestle with the great human problems of Aeschylus or Euripides. Oh, wow, don't say that around Wheaton College. But she was recognizing that people, like the response to her plays about Jesus, all people cared about is that she didn't use King James English. It's like they don't want to understand it. They just want to protect the status quo. And so that is what she was thinking about. People who don't really want to grapple with great human problems, and maybe you need to go back to drama. So I go back to drama in the book and show how the history of drama, which Sayers loved drama, and I think that preceded her love for film, drama is religious. The theater of Dionysus, theater started by celebrating the death and resurrection of a god, the god Dionysus. And our word tragedy just means goat song because they would sacrifice a goat on stage while singing about the death and resurrection of Dionysus in ancient Greek theater. And it's interesting to discover that some scholars think that Jesus may have worked on a theater that was only 4 miles from Nazareth because he was the son of a carpenter. And we always think carpenter, oh yeah, wood. If you've been to the Holy Land, did you see a lot of wood there? No, it's almost all, it's deserty, there's stone. And so probably many think that Joseph may have been a stonemason and worked with wood as well. And since this was 4 miles from Nazareth, as a boy, he accompanied his father and helped build a theater. And part of the significance is that when Jesus calls Pharisees hypocrites, hypocritai was the name for actors. So Jesus, familiar with theaters, just 4 miles from where he grew up, would know that, the Pharisees, they were putting on an act. They were pretending to be open to Jesus when they weren't. So Sayers became very interested in film origins, and she says, I recognize in the theater all the stigmata of a real and living church. And so that then led to a chapter of my book, how do you distinguish between the stigmata of theater versus the stigma of film? Because after sound came in, the whole reputation of film just crashed, for good reason. There were these crummy films being produced. And so I then say to understand, and in my book I talk about to appreciate film, you have to appreciate what theater is doing, but then what is the distinction between theater and film? And here, Sir John Gielgud, who would just praise his theater work, and he appeared in film, but most great actors looked down on film in Sayers' day. So, what is distinctive about film, rather than the stigma, what distinguishes film from theater is the cuts in the medium. And so this was very important to the development of theories about film. How is it cut? Theater, you sustain the scene on stage. So anytime, if you're going to compare film to theater, even though most of the early filmmakers came out of theater, they had to realize it has, how do you get away from the stigma of film? You have to have a stigmata, and of course the stigmata is the cut in the famous cuts in St. Francis' flesh. And so the two essential elements of film are mise-en-scène and montage. Mise-en-scène, that is something taken from theater. Again, it's just everything that's placed in the scene. So the mise-en-scène is what you see in the frame of a film, and montage is the cutting. So in Mind of the Maker, then I get into, and I'm going to finish this up quickly, I get into Sayers' sense of what creativity involves, and famously she talked about that God, we all know that God is a Trinity. Well, she argues that aesthetics, creativity are Trinitarian as well. That there is idea, energy, and power. And one of the things that got really exciting for me when I did this book was discovering how many people, filmmakers who aren't Christians, and in Mind of the Maker, Sayers said, anyone who is creative recognizes there is a triadic, Trinitarian element to creativity. And so I give the example of Ingmar Bergman, who actually talks about his magical triad. I give the example of Francois Truffaut. These are famous, famous filmmakers. And Sayers talks about idea, energy, and power are part of the Trinitarian creativity. Francois Truffaut talks about perspective, energy, and power. He uses, this famous filmmaker, some of the same language Sayers does. So I wanted to show that the history of drama, how it leads to film, and how great filmmakers had to distinguish what they were doing from drama. And over and over and over again, they are echoing ideas from Dorothy Sayers. Ideas that people didn't know about because her letters about film were not published. I'll just stop there so we can have a time for question and answers. I mean, this is a very complicated issue, but do you have questions about what's going on in this book? Oh.
Thank you so much, Crystal. We do have time for questions and answers, and I've got the mic. And it would be good if you talked into the mic because we have people watching online as well. Any questions? Yes.
Hey, thanks so much, Crystal. We all really appreciate this. Just a quick question. Could you maybe talk a little bit about wartime, and in particular how the World War II affected Sayers' view and affected really the cinema industry? It seems like if you had crummy movies in the 30s, you had the war in the 40s, and then she died in the 50s. Maybe talk about how that aspect affected or didn't affect her view of cinema.
Right. Thank you for that question. It's almost like I paid you because I have a whole chapter on the war. Because what's interesting about Sayers is she was living, and I trace a history of film with her biography. And so she's living at the time most of the developments of film are happening. And so during the war, that's when Noel Coward started making films, and he's considered this great filmmaker. So the 30s were the nadir, but then the 40s started pulling people recognize the need of artistry in film. And you get much more power happening in the 40s. You get film noir, for instance, and I may have even a picture of film noir. So here are two important filmmakers, and they were quite big during World War II. So film actually made a comeback, which is hard to believe, both during and immediately after the war.
Other questions?
Hey, lady.
Hey.
So I appreciated your talk, and I want to read the book, obviously, but I really want our film recommendations. So I want to know what films now appear rich, even sublime to you as a result of doing the project. So on the other side of all this work, after living with Dorothy Sayers, well, obviously for many years, but really closely in asking these questions, what films do you see differently now?
Yeah. Well, one of the movies I talk about quite illustratively, and this is thanks to Elaine Hooker, she recommended Barbie, the Barbie film. And Christians were brutal about the Barbie film. But the thing is, they didn't get it, because it starts with an allusion to 2001: Space Odyssey, and it's the same music. And the Barbie film is incredibly profound about what does it mean to be human. And so I spend quite a bit of time on that, and there is a moment in the film where Barbie, the Barbie doll, meets her makers. It sounds crazy, but it is very, very good. There's some films I just talk about a little bit. One of the war films I talk about in addition to Bridge on the River Kwai is The Railway Man, which is another film about prisoners of war during World War II. And it is quite profound. And part of it is to see how the techniques of the film itself create power, as Dorothy Sayers would call it. You have, in cinema making, idea, energy, power. The idea comes from a studio head or a screenwriter, but then the energy is when you start making it, and the power is the response to it, this Trinitarian perspective that Dorothy Sayers talks about in Mind of the Maker. So, Railway Man, Lars and the Real Girl. Has anybody seen it? Okay. Yeah. It's a film that kind of shocks you at first, and you think, should I be watching this film? And then it's one of the few films I've ever seen that has a positive view of Christians. So many films and TV shows, as soon as you see a cross in somebody's, hanging from their wall, you go, okay, that's the murderer. It's almost a cliche these days. So to have a film that presents Christians positively is great. Wow, Railway Man.
Fast and Furious, you really like?
No. I've had 3 publication deadlines since this book came out. So, also Birdman is very, very interesting. Michael Keaton's Birdman. So a lot of the films I talk about aren't ones that you may have heard. Well, everybody's heard of Barbie.
How about In Darkness, we talked
Yeah, I talked about that in my other film book.
So don't watch.
Yeah, no, it's good as well.
So, you read about Dorothy, read her letters, and she kind of takes your breath away. So as you were researching, what was something that either surprised you or just like was one of those, oh my word, moments?
Well, one of the things was here at the Wade, when she was writing her parents, she would talk about films she went to, and of course these are not included in the collected letters because the editor wanted to prove Sayers was brilliant and didn't think people who liked film were brilliant. But then she'll actually have drawings of what is known as the mise en scène, what is placed in the scene of a film to communicate to her parents. And she would recommend movies to her parents. So that was a fun discovery. But also just trying to, I myself, because nobody had really done it before, is try to grapple with the mutual dependence, but also antipathy between staged theater and cinema. Because cinema picked up so much from stage theater, but then had to distinguish itself from the stage, because many early films, it's just filmed theater. And so that the whole process of distinguishing the two. And Sayers, because she believed that the Imago Dei was creativity, that we are created in the image of God, our creativity fulfills the Imago Dei. So to even be creative about understanding other people's creativity is important. Yes?
Thank you. So, Crystal, speaking of creativity, what do you think Dorothy Sayers would think about Steven Spielberg or E.T.?
Oh. You know, she was like the cinephiles of her day, in that when her film was made, Silent Passenger, her story was made into the film, she repudiated it. So she would, I can't say what she would think about certain films. I know what I might be able to say about certain films, but she would say that you need to be concentrating. What distinguishes film from the stage are these two things in red. The montage, and that is cutting together shots. And how the cutting together of shots can make you think in a certain way. There's a lot of people are shocked to discover that the first film school was in Moscow. Lenin recognized film could be a powerful tool. So there were these theorists trying to understand the aesthetics of film. And one person, named Kuleshov, and it's now called the Kuleshov effect, they would show to people a person's face and then a shot cut to a bowl of soup, and then ask the audience, okay, what was that person thinking? And everybody in the audience would say, oh, he's hungry. And then they'd show a shot of the man, and then show something like a...
He's under in a casket. A woman in a casket.
Yeah. And they would say, he's sad. But they didn't realize it was the exact same photograph of the man. So the juxtaposition of shots made the people see the man differently. And that is what radically distinguishes film from the stage. Because and this is what Sergei Eisenstein did, this famous Russian filmmaker. Montage is this juxtaposing different images, and the way you juxtapose images shapes the way people respond to film. Whereas another film theorist, French film theorist, famous Bazin, for him, it's just the mise en scène, and that's borrowed from theater, everything placed in the scene. So he encourages not rapid cuts, but just long runs of the camera. And so there are different theories of what makes film distinctive, just as there are different theologies. You're going to get a slightly different way of understanding Scripture if you're talking to an Eastern Orthodox person, if you're talking to a Pentecostal, if you're talking to a Lutheran or a Roman Catholic. Same Bible, and just as in film, you often take a book that then is made into a film, and different filmmakers will emphasize different aspects of the book, just like Christians will emphasize different aspects, or Pentecostals. Another example, they read Scripture differently than non-Pentecostals.
We have time for one more question.
Is there any, I guess, I'm not sure exactly if she may have seen it, but Leni Riefenstahl,
Oh yeah, Leni Riefenstahl.
Triumph of the Will. I mean,
yes.
it's crafted.
I mention her in my book.
That's what I was going to ask you. Does she talk about it? Does she interact with it?
Well, that is a great question, because even though Leni Riefenstahl, she herself was Jewish, but she valued German-made pro-Nazi films if they are artistically made. So it's about the artistry of the film itself, whereas unfortunately many Christians reduce film to message. And anytime you see, the camera may focus like on this window, and they say, oh, look, there's a cross. So that probably means, with no justification in the rest of the film. I also, I compare Sayers' thought to many film theorists, and I trace the history of film theory, which is kind of like the history, the development of theology. The theology of Augustine differs from Abelard. So, working with the same Bible, and so many film theorists, they're working with the same film, but they emphasize different things.
Let us thank Crystal Downing again.
Thank you.